Hi there, and welcome to part 6 of the series on dutching, specifically the horses. And today I'm going to move on to using pace maps. However, I should point out one big caveat. This particular selection method is still a work in progress. I've changed my thought processes on this over recent weeks. So it's not a completed work. And at the moment, I still prefer using the NAP checker selection method over this particular method. Last October, November, I posted a number of screenshots and videos showing some excellent results using pace maps. And then it hit a drawdown in December, and I haven't looked at it since Christmas. But I have been thinking about it. So my thoughts have changed. But first of all, let me start off by describing how I was making those selections back in October, November. And then I'll tell you the changes that I think may be necessary, although I haven't fully tested them as yet. But we'll try them out on the first 2 or 3 races this afternoon. Okay, to access the pace maps, simply go to the racingtv.com site /racecards. The first race today is the one at Dundalk. Notice that it's on the all weather. So if we click on the time there, get rid of these silly adverts, and notice that it's a 2-mile race with 13 runners. Click on the TF pace map, and that then produces this graphic here. Now, if you're not familiar with the pace maps, these little squares, these coloured squares, represent the probability of the possible early position, the EPF as Racing TV calls it. Now, it's unclear from this what it means by the early position figures. Is that the position within the first couple of furlongs, or is it the position within the first half of the race, and so on? I think the important word in there you need to look at is early. Keep that in mind as I carry on. Also notice that the darkness of these squares also tries to indicate the probability of that particular runner running in that particular place. And you'll see the darker you go, the higher the probability that the pace map is thinking that it will be the position of the runner. Whilst I'm talking about that, if you come across a race where there's hardly any dark squares, in other words, all the runners are sort of down round about this sort of shading, don't get involved in that race. I don't think there's enough confirmed information with regard to the running styles of those horses. So just keep that in mind. Stay clear of that type of race. In addition to that, the little graphic of the actual horse is, as indicated here, indicates the predicted early position figure. So essentially the graduated squares gives a range of where that horse is likely to run, and the actual position of the horse within the graphic gives its predicted position. Now, my original thinking when I first started looking at these was that given that we want to trade out in running, we need horses to shorten in price, and therefore it may be better to look at confirmed front runners. However, I didn't necessarily go down that route, because if we consider this idea of early position, and we also consider a long race, any runner, any horse that's known to be a front runner, I don't think will necessarily fall in odds a significant amount in the first half of the race, assuming that it's running okay and everything else is running okay and no horse is whacking into fences and the like that would cause sudden shifts in the odds. And consequently, choosing a front runner over in a long race, I don't think is necessarily the way to go. Or I didn't think that was the way to go. Long races, generally speaking, assuming everything's running okay, don't really start to heat up until the business end of the race, understandably so. And how many races have we seen where there's been a confirmed front runner leading the field all the way round, only for it to fade in the last 2 or 3 furlongs? So that was my thinking at the time back in October, November, and the results that I was getting at the time bore that out. So what I was doing for my selections at that time was actually mixing and matching. I wasn't going for an out-and-out front runner, which would be represented in the first column, and I wasn't looking for a complete hold-up horse that runs right at the back of the field. What I was looking for is something that ran prominently, and then I was mixing and matching and having one that would be sort of towards the rear. So essentially I was looking down, I was trying to balance things effectively, and it seemed to work really well, as you saw from those results. So I'd be looking down sort of columns 2 and columns 4 for the darkest squares, and I'd also be limiting myself to the top half of the market. Anything in these sort of odds away up in the the 50s, the 100s, the 25s, I wouldn't get involved in, generally speaking, because during the race there isn't a huge amount of money to drive those odds down, certainly early on. So I'd be looking at the idea where the top half of the market, those are the more fancied runners, i.e. fancied to win the race. And that was my thinking. And the results bore that out, I would suggest. Until it started hitting a downturn. And when I looked back at the results, what I found was in those races where I had selections that went on to win the race, never mind just trade out, that went on to win the race, the vast majority of them came from the rear of the field. Very few of them were actually confirmed front runners or ran prominently, which in itself was quite interesting. So my thinking has changed slightly, and so what I'm going to concentrate on for this video, but I guess the process itself is similar. You just look down the necessary column, look for the darker squares, and look for 2 or 3 horses in the top half of the market that you want to Dutch. But I'm going to concentrate on those horses that are either mid-division or towards the rear. So in other words, we look down column 3 and column 4. That would be the plan. If, not so much in this race because there's quite a few of them, but if you do have one standout prominent horse in column 2 that's in the top half of the market, you might also want to include that in your selection, but cover it, as insurance. Now, what I've just said all there, applying to long races, may not necessarily apply to shorter races. There's certainly an argument to say, well, let's look for prominent horses in a sprint. Given that a sprint lasts, 60 to 90 seconds, depending on how far it is. The race is over fairly quickly. So any horse that jumps out and is a known front runner and jumps out of the stalls quickly will shorten very quickly. So there's certainly an argument to suggest that you look at more prominent figures for sprints. There's another caveat I think I should say, however. Be careful of sprints that go around a bend. So we're predominantly talking about all weather. The reason for that is there may be some other things that you need to take into account. For example, any horse that comes out of the stalls and hits the bend first, whether they're a confirmed front runner or not, will shorten significantly in price. Even if they are overtaken in the home straight, because they've grabbed that bend first, they will shorten. So you may, on sprints where there's a bend involved, need to take into account the stall draw for the runners, as well as potentially the position of the stall in terms of how far it is from the first bend. So my thinking process isn't fully fixed on sprints yet, particularly all weather. And it just so happens, of course, the next one is an all-weather race, although it's a 2-mile race, so that's not quite so bad. So with all that said, this is, as I say, still experimental. That's my thinking at the moment, and so we'll go with the idea of looking at columns 3 and 4 and making our selections from there. So you make a note of the length, you make a note of the number of runners. So we're looking really at this, effectively this top 6 in this market, and we're looking for the darker squares. So clearly that one there is a midfield runner, and these two are towards the rear, although they are predicted to be right at the back. So for this particular race, I'm going to go with this one: Bambino, Mephisto, and Eastern Tornado. So we need to look at the actual market itself, open up the Dutching tool, and make our selections. Now the actual odds, they're all relatively well balanced, so I don't feel the need in this particular case to use any form of insurance, although you can do it. So if you set that to 0, of course, that's a scratch trade on Mephisto. But you can change that so you balance it, so you get some money on everything. But in this particular case, I am not going to do that. I'm just going to keep it as a straightforward Dutch over those 3 runners. So we're nearing the off. Let's just skip ahead until the race is underway and I've placed a Dutch. Okay, you can see I've placed a Dutch. If any of these 3 horses wins, it's a £308 profit after commission. However, I am going to do a green up on this one. Again, you can see I'm in simulation mode while I'm testing this. We'll green up for £25, but keep a note of that potential profit if any of these win. As I say, as I've demonstrated in previous episodes, it's worthwhile while you're first doing this not to green up, and just give you an idea of what sort of levels you can green up on in these sorts of races. It's also worthwhile just taking a mental note of any front runners in there. So it's Sky Legend and V Dancer, I guess, are the 2, and possibly Chut's Pal. As I say, because I've changed my selection process slightly, everything's up in the air with this particular method. I'll need to do a lot more races. But now that you know how to do it or what I'm doing, feel free to test it yourself. So I'm heading out just after 2. So I'll do the next one, which I'll do up to the 150 because that's a 6 furlong sprint. So that might be useful to do that one as well. Keeping in mind my reservations about doing things on the all weather and round bends and so on and so forth. Now this is fairly typical that you'll find if you are concentrating on horses that, generally speaking, run mid-pack or towards the rear of the field. They tend not to make their move until the second half of the race. And this is the sort of thing I was finding last November, was that it wouldn't be until the second half of the race that you would actually be able to green up. So keep that in mind, and don't be panicking into greening up or redding up halfway through. So you can see Mephisto has actually come in a significant amount. Eastern Tornado isn't doing so great, and Bambino is much the same as he was when he first started. What other runners are doing quite well? We've got Jake Peter seems to have come in a reasonable amount. What sort of runner is he? Yeah, he's a midfield horse, but as I say, his odds, generally speaking, off were a little bit too high. But that's just a personal preference thing. It's an intuition thing, if you like, by concentrating on the top half of the market. there's nothing to stop you picking things that are further down the field. So it looks like our first two runners are more or less out of it, and we're depending on Mephisto to come in a bit more. Doesn't look like we're going to get it though. So if we look at the pace maps again, oh well, he's come. I keep on saying it. Don't trade out early. So the way that green up has happened, because Eastern Tornado is already at 1000, there's been an imbalance on the green up process. So we could have traded out for possibly a little bit higher there, but £32. As I say, that's yet another example. I've shown you loads of examples where if you hold your line, hold your nerve, more often than not, things come good for you. Okay, so you can see V Dancer there. If we skip back, V Dancer was the favourite, a prominent, if not front runner, but didn't really have much of an impact on the market really until right towards the end. So that's another sort of thing, another reason I'm saying it might not be a good idea to go for out and out front runners. Anyway, let's just switch to the next market. Four runner race, I should say. Generally speaking, these aren't particularly good. GT 3 mile as well. No, this is a leave. Leave this one alone. There's nothing of major interest there. Gene Genie and Call Me Rafa would be the two picks, I guess. What sort of odds do we get? Or what sort of return do we get? Nah, this is a leave for me, so let's just bypass this and we'll skip ahead to the next race. On the other hand, we won't bother. A two-runner race, waste of time. Okay, looks like we're going back to Dundalk again in 25 minutes. Okay, we've skipped on to the 150 at Dundalk. Keep in mind this is a 6 furlong handicap. So if we go to the right damn page, that is. Racing TV, you'll see if we follow my thoughts that I've been having regarding sprints and looking for more prominent runners, you'll naturally home in on these three here. So that's Scarlet Dancer, Q8 Direction and No Speed Limit. However, keep in mind that this is an all-weather track, and you can go to this website here, Draw Bias, and you'll see if we click on Dundalk All Weather, there's the track. It's a left-hand track, so there's a 6 furlong start, so it's very close to the bend, so there's going to be a mad dash to grab the bend. So let's check to see if there's any draw bias on the 6 furlongs, and you'll see in the summary down here that it's a big advantage to be drawn low. So are any of those runners that we're looking at drawn low? We've got Scarlet Dancer is drawn in 10, Q8 Direction is drawn in 5, and No Speed Limit. So those two are perhaps the favourites for our Dutch, with potentially that one there. So as I said earlier, that's why in all-weather races, in sprints, round a bend, you may need to start thinking about other factors when using pace maps. So what we'll do is look at that Scarlet Dancer, Q8 Direction and No Speed Limit as being our selections. So that's going to be those three. Now, given that Scarlet Dancer is drawn in 10, so they've drawn outside as opposed to Q8 Direction and No Speed Limit, if we think about that draw bias website, it would tend to favour these two. over that one. So you might want to actually just provide yourself with a little bit of insurance on Scarlet Dancer, which is the way I'm going to go for this particular race. As I said, this selection process is essentially starting afresh, but leading on from what I learned back in October, November. So the pace maps in this particular case, combined with that draw bias information, I think is potentially the way to go. So in this race, we're looking for prominent runners rather than ones that run at the rear. And we really want one of these runners here to grab the bend first. And you should see that odds drop dramatically and will end up trading out before halfway round, I suspect. Okay, so I'll just skip on to the start of the race and see how it goes. Okay, we should be off shortly. You'll see I've placed a Dutch with essentially an insurance bet on Scarlet Dancer. And £164 win if the race was to run through to its conclusion. However, I've again set up a strategy to green up for a £25 profit. So they're currently loading and they should be off shortly. Okay, off and running. So we want one of those three to hit the bend first. And you can see we're almost at a green up option just now. That's it being placed just now. Excellent. If only they were all that easy. So that was a good example. So just a reminder, as I said, my thinking with regard to sprints is to go and look for runners in these two columns, not necessarily an out and out known front runner, but certainly one that runs prominently. And with a sprint, especially on one with a bend, as in this one here, look at the draw bias and see if your selections are drawn favourably. Okay, right, now that I'm going to be around for the next wee while, we can look at some other races. So on to the Hereford at 2 o'clock. Okay, so again, make note of the number of runners and the distance. So this is a long race, 8 runners. So we're predominantly looking at the top 4 or 5 in the market. Usual story. So we're going to be looking down columns 3 and 4. Now you'll see from this there isn't a huge number of darker squares. They're all hovering sort of around here. So this is a marginal race, but I think we'll look at undecided, to be perfectly honest. I think we're looking at this one and that one certainly. And those two. Right, what we're going to go, we'll do those two and insurance bets on those two. So I don't know what the return will be on this. We'll need to check on that first of all. So that's going to be Nikkei, Koya, Circus Act and Lemon Ice. Nikkei's a very short price favourite, so that's going to completely skew the results. Nikkei, Circus Act, Koya and Lemon Ice. Yeah, waste of time. If we remove Nikkei, that's more reasonable. I'd be tempted to ignore this race. Let me see. Yeah, even if we selected Nikkei and set that to 0, you're still going to get a very poor return. So it's not a viable race from that point of view, certainly from a trading point of view, if you were to include Nikkei. Right, this is a non-race for me. I don't like the idea of that short price favourite. However, what I think we'll do, just for the purposes of the video, we'll look at these three, I should say, and this one we'll put an insurance bet on it. So that's Circus Act. So essentially, it's the front two in the market, or the front two in the. Yeah, let's do it that way. I'm concerned about Nikki though. Now, keeping in mind, however, because she's a short price odds-on favourite, she won't necessarily come in that much anyway. So I'm expecting her to drift at some point during the race. But generally speaking, this wouldn't be a bet for me. But we're still 5 minutes out, so let's see how the odds change before the off. Okay, just ready to submit the Dutch. You can see that the odds on Nikki have come up a little bit, but not significantly. I'm still expecting this one to drift in running. But as I said before, this initially in real life wouldn't be a bet for me. But since we're doing things in simulation mode, let's see it. So we've got insurance on Circus Act. We're not getting involved in Nikki, so we're looking for Ouya and Lemon Ice. Again, we'll trade out for 25, hopefully. Start time. So they're at the post just now. They should be off shortly. Okay, we're off and running. Hopefully we'll get some sort of green up here. As I said, this wouldn't necessarily be a bet for me in real life, simply because of that odds-on favourite. Of course, it's a maiden race as well, and quite frequently the odds-on favourites tend to win these. But we'll see. You'll see Lemon Ice has dropped in nicely, which is good. We obviously need these two to contribute as well. But with it being a 2-mile race, I don't expect to green out until at least halfway through. We'll soon find out. It's totally dependent on what happens to Nikki. As I said, I would expect her to drift at some point during the race. And she won't need to drift a huge amount for us to get into a green up position. Also keep a mental note that if we allowed this to run through to its conclusion, we've got £190 more or less potential profit on Ouya and Lemon Ice. So you can see we're halfway around, and the favourite has come in a little bit, but it hasn't made a huge impact on the overall green up position. So you could certainly manually trade out if you were still uncertain and then get a relatively small loss. But once we get past the 50% stage, you'll find that figure starting to increase or decrease depending on how you look at it. Okay, so it looks like we've lost it on Lemon Ice. This is the type of thing I found really last October, November, in races where there's an odds-on favourite, especially if one of your odds-on favourite is potentially a pick. You have to be very careful in getting involved in that race. So as I said, this wouldn't have been a race I would get involved in real life, but it's worthwhile doing it as part of this video. Now there's our drift on the favourite arrive, but it's too little too late, I would suggest. And it looks like it's Circus Act is going to be the one that would have contributed to us, but of course we've only got insurance on that one. So we're now at the point where we actually need Circus Act to actually win effectively, which it looks like they're doing. So the insurance worked, and that's fine. But as I say, that was just very much a trial run, as it were, not a race I would normally get involved with. Okay, let's do one more race. This video is already half an hour long, and I think actually let's just jump to Dundalk and do another sprint. Fairly large field, and it may be worthwhile testing that addition to the selection process. So quickly nip to Dundalk again. So again, it's a 6 furlong, so we know low draws are best for 6 furlongs at Dundalk on the all-weather. We've got 14 runners, so we're looking really at the top 7 or so in the market. Looking for front runners. So you can see from this, we've got a potentially 5. You've got to go all the way down to Made to Shine for half the field, as it were, for 7. But the odds are starting to get a little bit high. What are they actually like in... Yeah, they're out at 13. So I think I'd be looking at these two, Alfarida and Poet's Pride. Royal, Tribute and Betrayed. Let's just see. Right, Alfrida's low in stall draw. Betrayed is high. Poet's Pride is high. Made to Shine is relatively low. So given the stall draw, I'm actually tempted to go Alfrida, Royal Tribute and Made to Shine. Let's see what they're looking like. So the return's fine on those. The other two of Betrayed and Poet's Pride, which are those two. If we wanted to do insurance on them, trouble is here that you're starting to get too many runners for your selections, which, as I've said before, starts to make it difficult to trade out, and it will be difficult to trade out in a sprint. So I'm tempted to go with possibly the top two, with Made to Shine as insurance. I'm just a little bit put off by the number of potential picks here. That's all. Yeah, 10 minutes to go, 11 minutes to go before the off. I'm tempted to do those 5 with insurance on those 3 and concentrate on the front 2. Let's see how the odds change just before the off. Okay, we're nearly at the start of this race. I haven't changed my mind. I'm covering Betrayed and Poet's Pride because of the pace map figures, but I'm doing insurance on them because of their stall draw. And covering Made to Shine, but with insurance, simply because of the odds that she's at. And that's us, so let's just submit that before the off. What I'm going to do in this case, though, is not green up. Given how quickly we greened up last time, I'm guessing that one of our selections hit the bend first, and consequently the rods dropped enough for the green up process to take place. I'd like to see how that happens and pans out further round the bend. 6 furlong race should be over and done with by within sort of just over a minute or so. So it'll take them 30 seconds to get round all the way around the bend. So let's see how that plans out. So let's just wait for this race to go off. Okay, we're off and running. So ideally we're looking for the first 2 in the market there to do the business, and with insurance on the other ones. But as I say, we'll just let this race run through to its conclusion, and then we'll wrap up the video. There you see Betrayed looks like it's coming in a little bit. And there's one of our favoured runners. So you'll see we're touched £37 trade up position there into the 40s. That's all looking good. And there's one of our insurance bets, is the one that's actually coming through to win the race. So that actually reinforces the selection process there, in that the prominent runners with low draws looked like they hit the bend first, and gave us the opportunity of trading out. But covering Poet's Pride for insurance worked fine. We just refresh that. Poet's Pride again, nice and prominent, was a valid pick. It was just the stall draw information that was putting me off actually going fully in Poet's Pride. So that's good. Okay, this video's getting on a bit, so we'll wrap it up there. As I said earlier, it's the pace map thing, as far as I'm concerned, still a project under development. But this video will let you see the types of things that you can do, and certainly gives you a good indication of the way I've been thinking about approaching them using pace maps. Okay, we'll wrap this video up. Next installment, I'll probably start looking at things that are perhaps little oddballs, things I haven't covered or missed out in the other episodes. So I guess there's probably only going to be 2 more episodes for this particular series. Okay, I hope you found that useful, guys. I'll speak to you later. Cheers.